Welcome to Sable Island Conference 2021, a series of virtual presentations about the natural wonders and human history of this endlessly fascinating island. This is session 4, The Women of 19th Century Sable Island, presented by Jill Martin Bouteillier. I am April Henniger, Chair of the Board of Directors for Friends of Sable Island, a volunteer-run charitable organization dedicated to the long-term protection and preservation of Sable Island. We've been holding a biannual Sable Island Conference since 2015 as a major fundraiser for our education programs, and especially our annual scholarships. We'd hoped to hold an in-person conference in 2021, but this proved too difficult with the travel restrictions and physical gathering size restrictions. So like the Olympics 2020 that were held in 2021, we are happy to present Sable Island Conference 2021 in 2022. A woman's work is never done, and nowhere might this adage be more applicable than on Sable Island in the late 19th century. Residents on Sable Island were isolated from the mainland of Nova Scotia by miles of ocean. The women and children living on Sable Island were isolated in a host of other ways. From the main station, the nearest human lived 2 miles away. The nearest settlement, number 3 station, was 10 miles away, and supply ships were frequently delayed by weather. Islanders had to learn to be resourceful. Jill Martin Bouteillier is an author, historian with family ties to Sable Island. She shares what life on the island playground in the middle of the North Atlantic was like for the children and the women who fed, clothed, and cared for them. All gleaned from primary sources such as diaries, logs, and photos taken by her great aunt, TRIXIE. Jill is also a volunteer director on the board of Friends of Sable Island. Take it away, Jill.
Thank you and welcome to everyone here. Hopefully your power didn't go out. We were lucky, we didn't. So that is a plus. So after an 18-hour trip by steamer, Sable Island appears on the horizon, green and gold. What might those women have thought? I mean, you see the latitude and the longitude there, and Sable Island just peaks up over the ocean. You would never expect to find it there. It's so small. So here they come. What would those women have thought as they were on their way toward the island? 16-year-old Annie Knox was joining her husband, Arthur Tobin, who was going to become the lightkeeper for the East Light. That was 1872. Or my own great-grandmother, who 7 months pregnant, accompanied by her 5 children, aged 3 to 9, came in 1885. A mile-long rockin' road through heavy surf, and finally being deposited on the North Beach and carried ashore by strong sailors. Apart from planes and helicopters, though, really not much has changed about how to get to Sable. A supply ship out there, a Zodiac ride, and you're on Sable. And that could have been in 2017, 2018. 280 kilometers from the mainland. Not much has changed. The case of emergencies, who do you call? The telegraph and the telephone poles weren't even installed until 1885, which meant you connect the island, but you are not connected to the mainland, not until 1905 when wireless station was built. Often it's said that the men are remembered for doing all the great things historically on Sable Island, like life-saving inventions, shipwrecks. The women, though, played a really important role. They fed and cared for their men, and they cared for their children. Once every 2 or 3 months, and my great-grandfather, R.J. Robert Jarvis Bouteillier, who was the governor, recorded once that it took 6 months and 19 days between supply ships. So there you are on your own. So the supply ships brought the staples, fuel, sugar, oats, all sorts of things for the pantry, crates of ducklings and goslings because you needed fresh poultry, lots of 4-legged animals to make sure that the rodent population was reduced, musical instruments, sheet music, music songbooks, and They brought women's dishes, wool for knitting, material for sewing, and RJ shipped this piano for his second wife. Luckily, we have records of the populations of the West Light, the East Light, the main station, stations 2, 3, and 4 across the island. When my great-grandfather, Robert Jarvis, or RJ as we always call him, at the end of each year, he recorded in his logs his own census. So how many people at each station, how many cattle, livestock, pigs, etc. 10-year government censuses were also recorded. In the late 1890s and the early 1900s, between 40 and 50 residents lived on the entire island. So this is the Sable Island. If you were to be able to blow it up, you can see the names of the families and who lived there, where they came from. The Soderbergs, for example, were from Sweden. But today we're going to focus more on the women. And here's a slide that I put together of some of those early families on the island. So at the top left is the Bouteillier family. That's my family. My great-grandfather is at the back. And then his 2 younger daughters and 3 of his sons. His oldest son, Clark, had already gone to San Francisco, where he was going to become a captain. Then the children over on the right-hand side, they're from several families who came for Christmas at the main station in, I think it was 1902. The Tobins down below. And then on the right-hand side, the Donaldsons, who kept main station, or station number 3. So they were real people. They came from Halifax, they came from other places, and they made a difference on that island. Well, hundreds of feral horses created a lot of shit. Mixed with sand and household compost, that soil was forked into huge gardens. And this is taken from the upper floor of the main station, looking down to the main garden. And they grew all sorts of things, root crops in particular, potatoes, mango beets, turnips, carrots, peas, anything that you could preserve well. And within, around main station, where my great aunt lived, a small garden was also there, and it was fenced, so it was protected. Roses and other flowers bloomed there. I just love looking at how neat it is. The pump was here, it was connected to Lake Wallace, and it was filling a cistern for watering the trees that were planted there in 1899 and the gardens. The kitchen, in the large kitchen to the back of the house, which is, you can just see there, stood a wood coal burning Lady Kosha stove. And when I did research of going through so many of my photographs, I was hoping I could find a picture of that part of the kitchen. I never did, but I know it was a Lady Scotia because they talk about it in the logs, and proudly it was made at the Lunenburg Foundry, which I also thought was really interesting. So a long table workplace was used for preparing food. And this is RJ's second wife. I think it's the next slide. I think it's the next slide. Dozens of loaves and of bread were baked weekly to feed the residents of the home. And of course, there she is. So that's Maggie, that's RJ's second wife. And you can see the size of that melon. Like it's probably a foot high. Like it's a big thing. And they were constantly busy baking because there were a lot of people to feed. Fresh eggs and poultry were abundant. And the next couple of slides, I think, show, oh no, this is TRIXIE. This is my great aunt. And you can see that pots and pans were everywhere. And on the back of this photograph, she writes who had taken it, who's John Dingle Taylor, who was a Marconi engineer. And he said, a fresh loaf of brown. And so it's wrapped up there. And so there she is in her kitchen doing what she did daily. Washing was, and those are poultry. Those are her ducks and her chickens that she was very proud to raise. And washing clothes. Oh, this is also her one willow tree. Ducks and chickens. Fresh eggs every day. Washing clothes was done in big barrels, and hot water from the boiler of the stove, indigo for bleaching or bluing. Clothes were dried along the fence, which is just behind her, or on inside on a clothes horse. Well, the women were not only inside, they were also outside a lot. And one of the things that they were good at was hunting. And this is my great aunt with her dog. And she's in what she calls her hunting costume. And she always used to boast that she was a better shot than her brothers. Deadeye, they called her. This is an interesting shot. It's only part of the image. She usually, when she was out, was killing probably ducks. And she did kill seals if they needed oil, which they rendered in the big oven. But here she's observing her 3 brothers digging out foxes. And what I like about this is that she proudly made that hat. Well, from an early age, the children on the island also learned how to use a gun. Now, I beg to imagine how this might go over today, but they were used, and certainly the children learned to respect them very, very young. Although there was always lots of work to do, children did know how to have fun. There they are with their ducks. I love the expression on the middle fellow. He can't be more than 7. And this is my great uncle Jim. He used one of his pets, this is Spud, I think, and made a dog cart so he could take things around, carry things around. And pets, oh my goodness, they had pets in spades, dogs, cats. And that's taken at the main station. From scurrying over shipwrecks, which this is, hunting for ducks, digging for clams, or climbing sand dunes, children found endless hours of joy just being outside. On rare winters, Lake Wallace and the ponds froze, creating wonderful places to ice skate. I love their outfits. Surrounded by water meant abundant supply of fish. RJ writes in his diary, or in his logs, one day that a full lobster pot was washed ashore, full of lobsters, and they must have had a great feast. But mostly they were out fishing, and this is on a small little sailed dory, and they fished for cod, for hake, for salmon. Berries too grew in abundance on Sable. Cranberries in good years, reaping hundreds of barrels. And you can just see it's sort of like a rake thing. It's a wide rake, and it has long tines that are probably about 6 or 7 inches high, much taller than a regular garden rake. And they raked out the berries, which grew really close to the ground, and then filled them in barrels and shipped them to Halifax. So at $5 a barrel, the money was certainly welcomed for operating the salvaging, the life-saving stations. Because when ships foundered, quite often the people on board would be there for weeks, maybe even months, until they were finally picked up. There was no way to telephone the owner of a ship that didn't come to Halifax and say, well, we've got your people here, come on over and get them. It didn't work that way. They just had to wait. And it was the women and the children, the young daughters especially, who preserved as much food as possible, put it in the root cellar, and saved it to feed these mouths that just arrived due to a shipwreck. In the late 19th century, Lake Wallace measured 12 miles from the main station to station number 3. Lake Wallace doesn't exist anymore. It basically is just sand, and it is where Debbie Brinkleman lands her plane or the helicopter come in, but it's gone. But at that time, it was long. Brackish at times, it offered up hours of fun for children who were either on a little dinghy or on a raft, just sailing along, pretending they're Huckleberry Finn. And eels. When the winds were stiff from the south, eels found their way into the lake. And apparently eel pie was a delicacy. I don't know, I've never tasted it, but they say. Entertainment on Sable was homemade. At least once a year, those living at the main station and the sailors' home put on a program for the people who lived there and who would come. Songs, recitations, duets, violin solos, whatever took their fancy. And this is housed in the Nova Scotia archives right now, but it was written by TRIXIE's older sister in 1897 for that particular program. And you can see what they were singing or what they were speaking. It's quite a delight, actually, to find something that old and prove that culture was not lacking on Sable Island, despite the fact that they were far from Halifax. And birding. Well, Sable Islanders welcomed birds of all shapes, from the diminutive Ipswich sparrow here, seen here, and snowy owls. In 1892, the children accompanied Dr. Dwight. His name was Dr. Jonathan Dwight from the Boston Ornithological Society, and he was seeking out to find where the Ipswich sparrow overwintered and nested. He came, the children were young, they knew where the nests were, and so they showed him around. And then when he went back to Boston, he published that book. And this was one of the plates that is in the front of the book that shows beautiful artwork of the Ipswich sparrow. And horses, well, you can't talk about Sable Island without the horses. And of the hundreds of feral horses, at least 35 were trained for drawing wagons, retrieving masts from shipwrecks to be reused or cut for firewood, and of course, coal. They salvaged a lot of coal, and particularly from the Skidby, because the Skidby in 1905 sort of stopped on the North Beach and was there for decades. And so they just went aboard and took the coal, used it for their own uses. The beaches, especially the North Beach, served as highways for the horses. So this is TRIXIE and her sister were great riders. I think there was one slide there, April, that was before. Yeah, so these are the two sisters, TRIXIE on the left and Bertha on the right. So this is probably about a year before Bertha went to Boston, where she trained as a nurse, and she contracted typhoid there and died. She was 21, and the family didn't hear about her death for about 3 months, which is a very sad thing. So, but they do wear wonderful riding crops. And then there's the next picture of TRIXIE by herself on her side saddle. And then this next picture is me with that saddle that we shipped to the museum after her death. She died in 1977, and she was 99 at the time. It was a very wonderful moment to be able to stand beside her saddle and know that while I was showing a picture of her on that saddle, it was almost 100 years earlier. So sites of shipwrecks served as signposts for how far you would be riding. And this is the Skidby just sitting there doing its thing. And TRIXIE's on the right, and then one of the operators in the middle, and then of course her dog Colo. And so they would go riding down the North Beach. We're going to go to the Skidby, or we're going to go to the Eliza, an earlier wreck. But it was like signposts along the road. And if it weren't for my mother, who kept those hundreds of documents, photographs, and other memorabilia, and for TRIXIE, who with her camera recorded many of those things that we have passed down from her, I would never have been able to preserve that long ago time on Nova Scotia's gem, Sable Island. And I wouldn't have the windows to those women and how brave they were living way out there. And this is the book that came from a lot of those documents and photographs that I have. And just as a side note, it's quite interesting that just last week, I received an email from a great granddaughter of Arthur Tobin, who was the East Light lightkeeper from 1872 to when he left in 1902. They kept in touch with TRIXIE all the way through that time and after they left, but she had no idea about me. But now she has gone on to the Friends of Sable Island website. She contacted me, picked up more books, and I think it behooves us to always realize that this cultural history is is very much worth preserving. It's a wonderful endeavor that we do here with Friends of Sable Island. And that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jill, for sharing your family history and photographs from 19th
April, I
century.
can't hear you. I can't hear you very well.
Is this better?
Yeah, a little. Yeah.
Thank you, Jill, for sharing your family history and photographs from 19th century Sable Island. Some things have changed, but it is still an isolated spot that encourages resourcefulness.
Yes.
For those watching the recording, if you like what you heard, please consider a small charitable donation towards our scholarship program. For those attending the live session, we will stop recording now and take some questions and hear some more personal stories.